And you're here too.
I'm here.
All right, so we've got a lot of questions, so I'll just do a quick introduction and we'll get moving here. So we are Latifa and Megan's here. You can see with the Alcoa logo, that's Megan. Megan's hosting, and I'll be helping to answer questions as well. And we are, of course, with ALCLA Native Plants, or you can say ALCLA Native Plants. And we are a native plant nursery that was founded in 1992. And we are now based in Carstairs, Alberta since 2023. And we acknowledge that we are located in Treaty 7 territory, which has been stewarded for generations by the peoples of the Siksikaitsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Tsuut'ina and Iari Nakota First Nations. We are also located in Métis District 4, governed by the Otipemisiwak Métis government of Alberta. So very grateful to be living and working and playing on this beautiful land. So, and of course, what a privilege to be stewarding native plants in these, which have such a rich history. So just sharing that gratitude before we get into the meat of the questions. So today's Q&A, the theme is converting your lawn to native plants. This is the last Q&A that we're hosting this spring. We're excited to see all the folks who have joined and have been interested. This is great. This webinar is being recorded so everyone knows, and you will receive a recording at the end. So typically in the past, if questions went beyond 12:30, we will extend longer to answer all the questions, and we understand if you can't stay, it's not a problem. Obviously, you will get a recording if you have to leave before your question is answered. To ask a question, please put your questions into the chat box. Megan will be monitoring the chat box, and we will be able to answer questions that way. You received a meeting link before, obviously, to join, and there is a link, of course, to, if you hopefully saw, to send your questions in advance. So I'm going to start with the advanced questions first before moving to the chat questions. So that's sort of the housekeeping all finished up here. So here we go. First question. I have spent 3 years trying to kill my dandelion infested lawn in Calgary's northeast using the cardboard, soil, and mulch method. And I think I have finally succeeded. I want to turn my front lawn into a pollinator friendly garden with mostly native plants. What are my next steps? So this is great. So if you have an area that's now clear and weed free, I'm not sure. One question I would have is the cardboard, is there any material still remaining? You might want to make sure you break apart and remove that material, because cardboard may in and of itself, well, just before I move on, I'm seeing a lot of movement. Megan, can you make sure that some people are pinned, and I'm concerned just about the recording end of things.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. I have you pinned for everyone. I'm not sure why other people are able to do that. I'll see what I can do.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know I opened up all the settings because we had issues in previous Q&As. I may have been overly generous and allowing all the settings to go forward, because previously there was some glitch and people weren't able to use the chat. Anyways, I apologize. So Megan, always some troubleshooting error. He says you're supposed to do one thing, it does another. But anyways, let's get back to the question. So now that once your soil is prepped, exciting. So it's just up to you now to figure out what isn't a realistic way forward. Do you have the budget and capacity to plant everything to fill your space? For example, we recommend an average. This is obviously, there's variation for this, but 1 plant per square foot. A bigger shrub is going to need more space. Smaller plants like onions, you could plant more densely. You can even plant more densely than that if you really want a more wildflower meadow to fill in. But in any case, I'm still distracted by, I'm not sure what's going on. Someone's having issues and they're pinning themselves and can't hear. I don't know why. It's very strange. Okay, anyways. Yeah, so the first steps then is to map out what you want to do. So you can also choose to start by seed, in which case you have to choose whether you want to do individual species or a bulk seed mix. What are your goals? Do you want a more formal garden, like having patches that are distinct where you can see the different plant species, or do you want something to appear like a wildflower meadow with grasses and wildflowers? I would caution with the meadow that make sure that you know that the grasses aren't just your long grass coming back, and you can tell the difference between what that is versus grasses you plant. That's where we often recommend the clump forming grasses like a June grass, a fescue, a blue grama, because those are very distinctive from a long grass which creeps along. So maybe avoid creeping grasses to prevent confusion. Anytime you see a grass creeping that has that rhizome, you're going to know, oh, okay, that's not the grass I planted or seeded. That's something else, and I know to weed it. So those are some tips in terms of management, because at this stage, now that you've got your site prepared, you have to get your plants installed, and you have to protect them from weeds over the next couple years while you establish your garden. Those are really the next steps. Megan, do you want to comment on that? Is there anything you want to add?
No, that sounded good to me. I don't know if I have any other advice than that. I'm also, I was just trying to figure out these other chat issues as well.
So, all right. Well, if anyone has any additional, whoever asked that question, if you have follow-up questions from that, let us know. But hopefully that's a starting point. Yeah, there are, of course, challenges from plugs and from seeds. But I will add, if you are doing a multi-phase approach, we're working on this project right now in Airdrie where we're helping with the planning and planting and so forth, and the design. We're looking at using a montane mulch to allow for a multi-phase planting approach. So you can use mulch to sort of occlude areas that you're not ready to plant or seed in while you wait, so that they don't become colonized by weed seeds or spreading weeds like creeping bellflower or Canada thistle. So just some other additional options to consider. So really at this stage, once your site is prepared, it's really about your capacity, how much you can put in at one time, and what your goals are. That's what you need to figure out next. Okay, so the next question is, I'm interested in lawn alternatives that will stand up to dog traffic, as in a 70-pound dog. That is quite tricky. The best results we had from client feedback was with silverweed, formerly Potentilla argentea, but I think it's changed now to Argentea. No, it was formerly Potentilla ansarina. It's now Argentea ansarina. But it's that creeping silverweed with the that spreads underground, and you might see it. It will actually naturalize in turf grass and on the boulevards and along right of ways and stuff. So it's very tenacious, very tough, and I've seen it really being trampled and have a lot of foot traffic. That's the best example, and we have had some clients specifically use that species for something that could be dog resistant. Now, ultimately, there's going to be limitations because it depends to the extent that the dog is using this area. But that particular client that we worked with installed all the silverweed, allowed the plants to establish for 1 year. You do need to let your plants establish, and then they had sort of fenced off the area from the dog before then in subsequent years allowing the dog back on. And from the feedback I got from them, that was successful, but I think there's a lot of variables there. So that's the species we've had the best success with. Unfortunately for us, we've had some difficulty propagating it, despite how tenacious they are. They're difficult to grow from seed, and there's certain limitations. But I'm hoping we will have some by fall this year. Megan, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that it's not as fun of an answer, but native grasses are a great alternative to grasses, a grass lawn, if you are thinking of high traffic. Yarrow is also pretty good. It can take mowing and stuff as well. That's all I can think of for not many things can take a lot of walking on. So grasses are lovely. The native grasses. You can replace your invasive grasses with native grasses.
Thanks, Megan. So there are some ideas. Yeah, some ideas, but so we'll leave it at that. The next one is, I see, this is an interesting question. I see Echinacea purpurea for sale on your website. I was told it wasn't native to Alberta. When you say it's native, is that to pockets in Alberta, the province, or Western Canada? So that's a great question. I mean, as a company, we don't say 100% that everything is native to Alberta. That is something we strive, because it's less about the colonial border in my perspective, but more about collecting locally to where we live. So yeah, sometimes we get a little bit on the Montana side or the BC or the Saskatchewan side, but we're I think really what's more important than worrying about like got political borders is ecoregion borders. So choosing parkland plants for parkland areas, choosing fescue plants for fescue regions, fescue grassland ecoregion zones, which extend across broad areas. But you're absolutely right in terms of the Echinacea purpurea. That's an exception. That has to do with a little bit of the history of the company. Our predecessors, Al and Pat Fedkenhauer, were from Minnesota, and that is an area where you could find Echinacea purpurea, and they included that. And we continued until this year. We are phasing out that species actually, but we continued it as part of the legacy. So it's a eastern species, basically an eastern prairie species. And sorry. Things keep popping up in my window, but yeah. So that's basically the short end of why we've had it to date. It's technically not native to Alberta. We now are focusing on the purple prairie clover, the Echinacea angustifolia, which is found naturally in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Who knows? There may have been a population somewhere nearby. It's hard to know, but it has not been documented. From what I've seen, but that we do that they are great pollinator species. I will say that about the Echinacea genus. They're beautiful flowers, and we do see quite a lot of pollinator activity in the fall and late summer. So I do like them, and they do well in our area. But 100%, that was one that's kind of really more to do with the legacy of the company, and we kind of kept that going for a while. So if you are concerned about where your plants are sourced from, because we do really believe in sourcing locally and using source identified seed, you can check on the seed packets. We're now adding whether a plant is source identified or not, or whether it's coming from a cultivated source. You can look on the seed descriptions. We'll say this is source identified. You can also just ask us, like, is this plant source identified? We prioritize that, but we aren't always listing for every single species. It's just labor intensive to make sure that everything we definitely try that, but there have been situations where maybe we're having trouble germinating a species, and we may have to order in from another grower, and that may not be source identified. And there are small exceptions, so in full transparency, but I would say the vast majority of our plant material is source identified, collected locally, and our goal is to strive for genetically diverse, locally sourced plant materials. So that's what we try to do. So I'll leave it at that. And then the next question is, are annual native seeds easier to grow than perennials? Not necessarily, although we do, not necessarily. Something like we have the strawberry spinach. They'll just pop up so easily in your yard, but when you actually try and cultivate them, we have a hard time germinating the seeds. So we're having trouble breaking dormancy. So I would say not necessarily on that question. Yeah, but some annuals are kind of easier, like the monkey flowers was one of the easier plants to germinate, sort of, but if they have dormancy, they're still going to have that dormancy, and it still can be unpredictable. Any success with shortening stratification requirements, particularly for those that require double dormancy? So double dormancy, to clarify, isn't a requirement. It's what happens, which we observe does happen. that even though all ideal conditions are met to break dormancy, the seed does not germinate, which means that there was some variable, whether it be light, temperature, or moisture, it could be something else, that was present that prevented the germination from occurring. And then there is a secondary acquired dormancy. And then in our experience, and from some papers I've read, one of the best ways to reset secondary dormancy is to dry the seed down and then restart again, trying to break dormancy. And we have found that effective for difficult to germinate species. Now, but it's not a requirement. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're not able to break dormancy, there is some cheating that you could do. Now, I don't have a lot of experience with it, but you can, for example, use gibberellic acid at very, very, very low concentrations, maybe like 1,000 parts per million. So there are hormones that can help trigger germination. I think that's the only way that I'm aware of that you can trick a seed, is these kind of hormone treatments. Megan, are you aware of anything other easy cheats, tips, tricks? Oh gosh.
Nothing easy, but like maybe, I mean, sometimes we do take baggies out early to trigger, so maybe taking them, I don't know, but sometimes it doesn't work, so who knows.
Yeah, so we're still learning. Like it's interesting this year. We've been modifying and improving and upgrading our greenhouses, but the side effect sometimes is species that have germinated historically are not germinating the same way. And then we have to look at, well, why is that? Is it because the temperature and humidity or light conditions have been altered? So we try our best, and then even still, it's challenging. It's very much challenging for us as well. So we always have to work together and be patient and try and figure out these seeds. And it's going to be frustrating. I can really relate to that. It can be frustrating. You put so much effort into getting a seed to germinate, or trying to germinate a seed, or a species will work for you, 1 year, and then the next year not. And I do understand that's frustrating. Unfortunately, it's a situation we are all kind of facing in a way. Next question. How do you overwinter potted seedlings above ground? So if you have small seedlings and you need to overwinter them, if it's in a container, keep them in a shady spot. Put them in a shady spot in the fall. Keep them covered in. You could cover them with some leaves to help protect them. Keep them close to the ground, and then allow the snow cover to keep them covered and just kind of protect them from the effects of the Chinooks if you're in the Chinook zone. And then when spring comes up, just take care for them as normal, and hopefully the seedlings come back. We do find native seedlings do come back after being overwintered, despite being very small. So just from overwintering the containers normally. So just, again, that's all you have to do is just leave them outside close to the ground in the shade. And then once it gets warm, move them into maybe a part shade or a bit more sun area. Don't leave them. If there are little seedlings, I wouldn't say pile tons of snow on them, just like allow natural precipitation, because at the end of the day, you don't want them to rot out either. So just sort of care for them once it seems like the season's shifting. Okay, next question. What are some hummingbird native flower favorites? Tips for fostering a flower meadow with grasses, but not just have the grasses take over. So first question, the hummingbird native flowers. So anything that has a tube-shaped flower, especially nectaries that are hanging down, will attract, like where the flower is hanging down and the nectar is at the top, so that the hummingbird can fly and then stick their beak in and collect the nectar at the end through their beak, at the end of their beak, at the end of the floral tube where the nectary is. So columbines, ribes, so the gooseberries and currants are good examples. I've heard monarda is a good one as well. Megan, do you have any that come to mind for the hummingbirds?
The honeysuckles.
Yeah.
No, I mean the monarda for sure, but I can't picture any others. I'm trying to imagine the flower shape.
Maybe, I wonder if lungwort, I'm not sure if I've read about lungwort specifically, but that does have those dangling flowers. We haven't had that plant for a while because it's very hard to germinate from seed, but maybe one day. We do have a little patch going, so. And then for the wildflower meadow, I would just suggest establishing your wildflowers first before the grasses, and or just using plugs to rather than overseeding with grass and having really dense grass. So that could be a way to have more wildflowers versus grasses. You can also maybe deadhead some of your grasses in the fall. So if you're concerned about the grasses spreading by seed and sowing themselves everywhere, then you could remove some of the seed heads and maybe put them somewhere else or give them away to the community as for a seed giveaway or whatever, so that those grasses can keep on giving in that regard. But yeah, I would say just and ongoing maintenance, I think, right? Because over time, grasses do encroach on wildflowers, and that's where historically, prescribed burning and the grazing patterns with bison and all these things were interconnected to maintain that biodiversity. In the absence of those things, and we're trying to find novel ways of intervening that support that. So yeah. Any thoughts on that, Megan?
Yeah, you could also try to just start with your wildflowers and clump forming grasses and introduce more spready grasses later, maybe in the following year.
Yeah. I want some wildflower seeds. I planted some wildflower seeds that needed cold moist stratification for 60 days. They were in my basement for a few days before I put them outside. The basement temperature was about 64 degrees. Before they went outside, a few seedlings emerged. I kept them inside because the seedlings would die in the cold. Should I have put them outside anyway? So yes, you did the right thing. If it's too cold for the seedlings to live. Now, native seedlings can handle 0 degrees or below zero. I don't know, like maybe -5. We sort of put -5 as a cutoff, but not because just for our own peace of mind. I think they could do a bit colder. So yeah, but before like we start plants in the greenhouse, if they germinate and it's January, February, or March, we're not going to put them out. We don't typically put stuff out until mid to late April, depending on the season and what the night temperatures are looking like and if they're hovering close to zero. So, but you absolutely did the right thing. So just keep them inside. You can put supplemental light, like grow lights, to support them during that initial phase. But you did the right thing. Last question from the pre-questions that were sent online. Is it better to start sowing seeds in the spring or the fall, or does it depend on the species and whether the species have stratified already? So yes, it does depend on the species. For most things, spring is fine. We do recommend fall in cases where the seems to take a long time to break dormancy or multiple years, just because it can seem easier than trying to do that artificially. Like, that's why we say fall sow, is it's sort of an easier approach to waiting 2 years with seeds, taking them in and out of the fridge or however you want it, if you're doing it artificially that way. So for example, Canada anemone is quite a tenacious plant, but difficult to grow from seeds. So, and we've only ever had success. Sometimes we also recommend, because that's the only thing that's ever worked for us. Not that we are the absolute holders of all the knowledge of breaking seed dormancy, because you talk to someone else and they're like, "Oh yeah, it worked for me. I did this thing," and you don't even you don't know why that is, that it didn't work for you, or it's not always clear. But in brief, only time we ever got Canada anemone seedlings to germinate was when we sowed them in the fall. So that's the best. We just offer what the knowledge we have based on the experiences we have, because there isn't enough information to definitively say in every situation what's the best approach. And roses often take 2 to 3 years. First year you get a bit of germination, but way better on the second and third years we find more germination. So we recommend a fall sow because it's easier for someone to just have a designated area in their garden where they sow the seeds, allow nature to take that course, and allow those plants to germinate. So that's why we recommend that in those cases. Some seeds seem to do better with whatever is happening in the natural environment is helping to trigger dormancy, and we're not able to account for that in an artificial context. And so, or they have that long period where it does take years, where that's why we recommend. So it's fall or spring. That being said, you could still plant lots of stuff in the fall and just allow nature to stratify the seeds. That's fine too, right? Just because you don't have to do it in the spring, you can do it in the fall. And then if that's easier for you, you have to figure out what works best for you and what your ambitions are and what is realistic, based on your goals and objectives and capacity. So yeah. Oh, and in terms of whether they've been stratified already, the only thing I can say that I know for sure that I've experienced is with the wolf willow. We do allow them to naturally stratify on the plant because the seeds persist throughout the winter, and then we collect the seeds in the spring, and in that case they don't seem to have any dormancy. So that's a case where yes, they've sort of gone through the dormancy breaking process naturally, and then you can just sow them. So for a plant that does that, which most don't retain their seeds like that, most plants, a lot of them just lose their seeds in the fall, then you can certainly take advantage of that and try to see if that helps to break dormancy. But that doesn't always work. I think for something like a rose, that could have the opposite effect. It could increase dormancy. So it's not like there isn't a one size fit all answer to that question. All right, it's 12:26. I'm going to do a couple announcements and then we'll take questions from the chat. So just as a reminder, you can find out more information about our work at alclanativeplants.com. If you sign up for the newsletter, we do currently have a promotion where you can get $10 off orders of a minimum of $100. I've seen quite a few people take advantage of that this year, which is great. And the newsletter is the best way to get access to information about upcoming events like this webinar, free Q&A, or other webinars, events, and product updates. Especially during the growing season, we will update folks on when species become available. The newsletter is always the first place where we post that information. So if you're looking for a niche species, like I know we have only 2 irises this year, the newsletter would be a great place to get that information and be the first one to get your hands on those plants. And then we do have next week our last online webinar of the spring. We may have something in the fall, but this is the last one that's actually scheduled. So it's supporting pollinators and wildlife with native plants. It's next Wednesday, I didn't write the date down, April 29th at 7 p.m. And this will be discussing how to create a garden that creates habitat for bees, butterflies, and more, and explores how native plants form the foundation of healthy ecosystems, and gain practical tips for designing spaces that support biodiversity year-round. And then we'll also be live this weekend at the Calgary Gardeners Market. If you'd like to say hi and see us in person, we will have a selection of live plants as well in advance of the sales going on at the nursery starting in May. So that will be this Saturday, April 25th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Atco Commons. And I will send a link with follow-up information with the recording of this Q&A. And then finally, you can follow us on social media. We are most active on Facebook and Instagram, but we also have YouTube, LinkedIn, and TikTok accounts. So that's it for my announcements. So I'll now take questions from the chat again, if you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely. So our first question here, where can I purchase bearberry or bunchberry?
So we might have some bearberry in the spring. We won't know until late May, June. We've put some for cuttings, but we haven't had the best success with the cuttings. So, but we also have ordered some in from another local grower. So from a wholesaler. So we may have some, but sometimes this depends on how things overwinter, etc. So I am expecting some, but I don't have anything definitive yet. Again, if you're on the newsletter, you'll be the first to be updated, and I'll let folks know bearberries are out. Get them while they last. Bunchberry, We have tons of seed. They are very difficult to break dormancy, and so every year we seem to get some. And it tends to be closer towards the summer that they become, like midsummer to fall, that they become available because they're very slow. But I don't think we've had any germination this year. Have we, Megan? Megan.
We have 2 currently.
2. Yeah, last year we had quite a few, but they all got sold. So yeah, we'll just keep your eyes peeled, and then there might be some available.
All right. Question about killing the lawn. What about solarization or using a dark covering? How soon do you start to stifle weedy grasses?
So if you're just occluding light as soon as possible, grasses are bouncing up right now. They're just like those invasive grasses. So yeah, as soon as possible, you could occlude immediately. And then for solarization, you do need to use the ambient temperature to support your process. So making sure that that's installed for the hottest months of the year. So July, for example, that having the solarization set up during those hottest months will encourage the weedy seed bank and to be killed, and the rhizomes to be killed. Now, I got some interesting feedback from Emma of Friends with Fish Creek, because they're doing a lot of solarization, that they found out that the quackgrass roots can become dormant if they're desiccated for an entire season. So occlusion alone may not totally kill the quackgrass roots, or even solarization, because that causes the soil to become very, very dry because you're occluding water. So they suggested, I'd have to refer back to the precise wording. Like, I forget exactly how I think they ended, instead of using clear plastic, they're using landscape fabric now for the solarization to allow some moisture to enter, because that will actually improve. Supposedly that actually improves the ability to kill these plants that can dry out and then become dormant in a dry state. It can help kill them if there's moisture involved. So that's something new. I haven't tried that. This is some feedback I've gotten. So we've been exploring this with folks. So yeah, that was from Emma from Friends of Fish Creek. Anything more, Megan, you wanted to add to that?
No, just probably that you want to start as early in the season as possible, because you have limited time, and it does take quite some time to kill everything that you want to kill before you're able to plant something. So you either start, late in the season and expect to plant mid-year the next year, or start very early and expect to plant later in the season.
Yeah, that's great. That very much clarifies. Megan, thank you. Next question.
For sure. How do you manage your native plants once they're situated and grow bigger over the years? Do you need to be dividing and pruning them each year, or if you want them in distinct clumps?
So I guess it's good if you have a specific species in particular you're thinking of, that can be helpful. But yeah, I mean, every year is going to be a new adventure for your plants in terms of what's going on with them. So if it's a clump forming plant, you shouldn't need to be pruning them if it's perennial, right? Herbaceous perennial, because they're going to die back from the aerial parts and then come back. But then certainly over time, I know some perennials, they get very mature, can have a dead spot in the area, or their growth can become more towards the periphery in a big clump. So that's where maybe division can help revitalize that patch, or some management there. That's something that I've heard. Don't have the horticulture background the way Megan does. Maybe Megan can speak to that after. But that's something that I haven't experienced that myself, but that could potentially happen. If it's a spreading plant, then division is a good way to help maintain it. Other than that, yeah, if it's a shrub, it's a little bit different. I mean, pruning can have some negative effects, so that's another subject specifically. But I think it was really you were more asking about the wildflowers, from my understanding, or maybe grasses. Yeah, so removing some of that, like Ben just did a garden cleanup where he cut back the grasses, but he left the plant material nearby so that any insects that were potentially utilizing that could still come out. But we had the giant wild rye, and it does help the new growth to cut back some of that dead material so that they can get the light access that they need. Otherwise, they're getting shaded by that very large material that has now died from the winter, and it is good habitat. So again, depending on your goals, leaving some of that stuff is good habitat, but it does create a cleaner appearance, and it is easier for the plant to grow new shoots if they're not fighting old material from the previous season. Any feedback on that, Megan?
Yeah, for sure. I think for the most part, this is either a spacing or aesthetics issue. It's not often that you would need to divide or prune something for the health of the plant. I think, yeah, so it really depends on, do you like the way it looks as is, or is it getting too unmanageable for the space that you put it in which case, yeah, definitely division or pruning is an option, but it's not going to like hurt the plant or something if you don't do it.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, next question.
All right, I have a north-facing front lawn that gets little sun and can often be quite damp. What do you recommend?
Because I don't have any, but right away I think of like colt's foot and just some shade-loving plants that don't mind a little bit of extra moisture. Delphinium, so the larkspur would be fine in that environment. They don't mind the shade. I don't know if we have any this year. The sweet scented bed straw would probably be fine. I don't know how wet is wet, but if it's like very, very, very wet, you do need something that can handle more standing water. Willows probably like a bit more sun, but there could be ones that if it's very, very wet, they don't mind wet feet, at least. What else? Anything come to mind, Megan?
Maybe the trailing raspberry or strawberry. I don't know. Yeah, it really depends on is it like the water pooling or is it just kind of hanging out?
Yeah. But those kind of shade loving plants that don't mind being wet, that kind of live in those environments that we talked about. Mm-hmm.
For sure. So next question here. How do I choke out a healthy Kentucky bluegrass lawn so yarrow and other plants can grow?
So you could just remove it with a sod cutter, or we could use the occlusion or solarization techniques that we kind of talked about. So occluding is just covering it with an opaque material, and then solarization is doing the same thing, but the idea is that it's like a dome plastic that it heats up and kills all the material. So I think that's technically the difference between the two, is the one almost creates a greenhouse-like effect. But as I mentioned, folks at Friends of Fish Creek are suggesting more the occlusion side of things to deal with the crabgrass from their experience. We have always done occlusion and we found it to be pretty successful. The only thing is the ground gets extremely dry and it doesn't help with compaction. So you are going to have to rehydrate that soil, and you still have some rhizomes that are going to have to be removed, it seems, at some point. It's hard to 100% eliminate some of those invasive grasses. Maybe again, because the rhizomes are going dormant. I'm not totally sure all the different mechanisms, but either way, yeah. So it depends how. But sod cutter, like a lot of the rhizomes are not that deep, and it's quite easy with a sod cutter, and then you can just plant right into it. So if you're not, that's easy enough to make sure you have good borders and edging around your bed. If you have existing lawn or you're maintaining some lawn, because it will just creep right back in. So you can create a material edging, like add a plastic edging, but you can also use air pruning, so just digging a small trench and allowing that space, like 6 inches deep, for example, that will prevent the rhizome from spreading into your planting area. Megan, if you have any feedback, go ahead, and then maybe the next question.
Sure. I think that pretty much covers it. I maybe just say that, I've taken it along with just like a a shovel. It's not usually sawgrasses. Their roots aren't very long, so it's not too hard. But if you don't want to do the whole area, just start one area and then do a little bit and a little bit. That can be a little bit more manageable if it's a very healthy lawn area. The next question here. Oh, this is in relation to replacing your yard with something that can take traffic. How is native yarrow for a little bit of traffic?
I think they're okay with some traffic. They do they are a plant that can be incorporated into existing lawns. I have not seen them like handle abuse the way that silverweed can. Like silverweed just grows in just the worst conditions, and I've seen it in parks just getting in the middle of a pathway being treaded on and just continuing to exist. I've not seen that myself with yarrow, so I don't think they're as amenable to that as the silverweed, just from my observation, not that I know 100%. Yeah, thoughts on that, Megan?
No, I definitely agree. I think it could probably take a little bit, but it might not be like great as if you're using that space a lot. Okay, the next question here, are there any clovers that would be considered native, and would they be suitable as a lawn replacement? I don't want to buy just any old seed, and I've heard that people are struggling with clovers that are too tall and thick to mow.
So there are no clovers native to our area. There is one in BC, the springbank clover, which I don't know how well they do in our area. It's a coastal species, so maybe the climate may not be suitable. I've not heard of anyone growing it here. So we do have the purple prairie clover, which is commonly called clover, but it's a different species. It's a dahlia, is the species. Dahlia purpurea and Dahlia candida are the purple and white. So that's probably not what you're looking for. The closest thing I've seen that is native that I think would actually function the way people want it to is the ascending milk vetch, which no one seems to be producing on a large scale, but we know we have plugs and we have some seed packets. I'd like to keep working on promoting it because it's excellent. If you go hiking or walking around the perimeter of Nose Hill, or even in Bridgeland in Calgary, those are my reference points. It has managed to self-seed itself in turfgrass boulevard and is mowed and acts exactly what people are wanting it to do. It stays low, produces flowers for pollinators, is mow tolerant, and it is tolerant to people walking on it. They don't spread by rhizome; they just form little clumps that spread out. But I think that is a native species that is just doing it. No one's tried it. It's just that it's the volition of that plant. It wants to be in boulevards and mix with lawn grass and have that and persist and fix nitrogen and improve soil fertility. So I think that's our best native candidate for our region that I've actually seen function that way. Any thoughts, Megan?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else. We already covered silverweed, so I think that would be the only other lawn replacement kind of.
Yeah, they're a great plant, sending milk vetch. So they're not hard to germinate, but they do need scarification. Currently, as I said, it's not in a huge production, but we do have a few. We will have some plants this year, and we do have seed packets.
Okay, so this person is wondering, where would you recommend purchasing soil from? Is there a particular brand or source that is best for growing native plants?
Not really. Like, we're growing in a peat-based medium. Now, I don't love using peat, but it is a Canadian product that is affordable for the scale that we're doing. If there was an alternative, I would use it, but it doesn't exist for the scale that we need it. So for starting plants, you can use a peat-based or a non-peat-based. You could use other materials. Coir, I'm sure, would be fine to start. But for actual planting in the ground, just using the natural soil is what we recommend. For people who need to fill a bed, we just recommend using a screened loam with perhaps a bit of organic material added, making sure it's a weed-free compost. But just keeping it as natural as possible, not trying to overly amend the soil is what we recommend. And for starting seeds, you can use whatever horticultural products you have in your community. You could buy a seed starting mix, that would be fine. Any thoughts, Megan, on that?
I think I completely agree. I don't think, unless you're, planting inside or starting, and even then you can really use anything as long as you're aware of what your plant is liking in terms of moisture. That's, but there's no like amazing brand that's going to be, this is the one that works the best. But yeah, I mean, if you're planting outside, it's, you just use the stuff outside. It's already there, and you don't have to buy it.
Yeah. And I will say, even with the peat base mix, not all the plants like it. We do need to amend it in terms of sometimes we add wild soil, like just as it's like a magic dust. Fingers crossed. Hopefully this does something. So we do hope that maybe the microbes from, like, we are on a rural property and there's pocket gophers and they leave lots of dirt everywhere and we collect it. This is a bunch of weed seeds in it too, so it does have disadvantages. But it has, I would say the best results we've had with it have been with the Shepherdea canadensis. Don't you think, Megan? I think that's been the best success.
Yeah, they look amazing and they're growing much faster.
So I think in that case, because that is the Canada buffalo berry associates with native bacteria, Frankia bacteria, which is different than rhizobium, and it does grow wild in our area. So I'm just hoping that bacteria is present in that soil, and it just happens to be luck of the draw that that species is doing really well for the first time ever because we use that natural wild soil amendment. But yeah, there's lots of room for experimentation and exploration, and not every species is going to love growing in peat, and we have that struggle ourselves.
Awesome. Our next question here: what is the most cost-effective way to remove or kill lawn in a 2-acre land in order to convert it to a native meadow?
Oh my goodness. Megan, I'm going to just defer to you because I just...
The most cost efficient, I mean, if you want to do it within one season, you may as well just rent a sod cutter if you don't have one available. That's a lot of space. If you are not needing to rush, I would just do a little piece at a time, and it would take multiple years to do that. It would take multiple years anyway to establish a native meadow, so that would probably be the most cost effective, with just like, the methods we've already discussed about killing lawn. But yeah, a 2-acre, I think probably just, if you want to do it fast, sod cutter is the way to go.
Yeah. And we might, again, if you're not going to be planting at all, consider using a mulch, or even straw mulch can be very cheap and is easily available. It can be cheaper than a fine wood chip mulch. We only recommend fine mulches for our native species, but yeah, straw mulch is very cheap. I would just be aware, like, anytime, as soon as you expose an area, it's going to become susceptible to weed invasion, and that's always the biggest challenge. So that's why a multi-phase approach can be better than trying to get rid of everything at once, because then you end up with a pile of weeds, and you may end up taking more steps backward than forward inadvertently when you're dealing with that weed. So just being very mindful of that.
For sure, for sure. All right. I received different packets of native seed, low milkweed, goldenrod, smooth aster, and prairie coneflower. I know some need to be cold stratified in the fridge. Is it too late now?
No, it's not too late. You can even still probably sow outside. Like, we continue to have pretty good germination with seeds that seem to need spring sowing until mid to late May. It's depending on the year. Sometimes we have a very hot May, and then if you're starting in the fridge, though, it really doesn't matter. You could put your milkweed seeds in the fridge for 2 weeks in July. They'll start germinating. You'll have seedlings in August. You can plant them, and they'd still be fine, and they'd still continue. So if you wanted to do it outside, you're coming to the end of the window. But if you're doing it artificially in the fridge, there is no. I would say just don't do it in August and your seeds germinate in September. That's a bit late. They might not survive. That's my answer. Megan, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think that's perfect. I think, yeah, you're good. If you do it in the fridge, you're good. All right, next one here. How much does soil chemistry and the nitrate ammonium balance impact germination?
I think it's that's not something we really worry about so much as moisture, light, temperature. Yeah, those are the things we pay the most attention to. That's not something that so I can't really speak to what the effect that will be. Megan, are you aware of anything specifically on that subject?
No, it's an interesting question, but I'm not sure how it would impact germination. It might impact the seedlings when they are growing because they're taking in the things from the soil. I have no idea. It's an interesting thing to speculate, but I wouldn't know what the effects would be.
There might be some research out there on the subject, most likely not on native plants, but probably some crop plants and such. So you could do more research, but yeah, not aware of anything specifically.
All right, our next question here. What would be a good plant that could be used like a fence, preferably if it gave fruit for people and or birds?
I think like Saskatoon is good. If you have the width-wise, the Shepherdea argentea is a good fence. They're kind of wide as well as, so they're kind of gangly. I guess you could prune them too if you want them to be a certain shape a little bit, but kind of guide them to grow a certain way. But that one is fruit bearing, and they have the thorns, so they have created a bit more of a barrier. I think wolf willow would be nice, but you'd have to be able to deal with them spreading by rhizomes. So you might want to, you could create like a contained bed for them so they don't spread outside of that. But their fruit, it's not like a sweet fruit, but the bead, the seed can be made into a bead, and then we save the powder and you can use it as a flour substitute in cookies. I just made some cookies. They turned out pretty good. Okay, Megan, so I think I was going to make some in a couple of weeks for an event. Anyways, digression. So it's not like an apple, but you can still eat the fruits of wolf willow. Willows would be great too, but they don't have edible fruit. But pussy willow would be nice and would be good for pollinators. Megan, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, you could, like, the first thing I thought about was actually the common tall sunflower, which it wouldn't be a huge fence or a very tall fence, but it just doesn't, but it sees birds like, and it gets pretty tall. Maybe a tiny fence. What else?
What about golden currant? Those get pretty big.
Yeah.
They're very tasty. Golden currant would be nice. And yeah, I mean, so, and it depends on your patience. Like we only have the plugs for these, but there might be some folks out there, growers. I'm not off the top of my head. I don't know who would have them, but they might have some bigger sizes for some of the stuff. So you could start out with the bigger size. So probably like currant, Saskatoon, choke cherries would be an okay. They get pretty big and make a good fence probably. And if you don't, depends on what your edible preferences are. A lot of these can make really great food, but just might be a little bit different processing than what we're used to. Or, I mean, people are familiar with cherries, but choke cherries, you can crush and mash the seeds as well and dry them and make like dried cakes and stuff. Those are traditional ways of preparing them that are quite tasty. So if you're open to experimenting, you can actually get really interesting and nice food from different native plants. I also really like giant wild rye. That's my preference for a fence. They're giant grasses, but they're just so dramatic and fun. I just love them. But yeah, they don't produce fruit. But I suppose you could mill the seeds down to a flower if you were very keen. Most grasses are edible that way. Anyways, yeah, if we're getting close to the end, how many questions more, Megan?
About 5 more.
Okay, let's try. We'll quickly. This is the last 5. We'll get through them in the last 5 minutes.
All right, we got it. What's the plant? Oh, what's the plant just referred to that stays low, pollinator friendly, and mow tolerant, found on Nose Hill?
It is the ascending milkvetch. The new name is Astragalus laxmanii var, variety robustior, but the former name is Astragalus striatus, which the older books will have that name. And it's not just it's in Nose Hill; it's escaped Nose Hill. If you walk like in Edgemont, like on the boulevard and stuff, you'll find it's actually spread itself. It just grows on the boulevard, so it's pretty cool.
Excellent.
We can probably type it out too in the chat if that helps.
Oh yeah, I can do that right now. Oh, this is a comment. I found that some natives do better in new soil, but most prefer old fungal soil. It would be great to have a document listing optimal porosity for each species. Oh, yeah. And then another comment. Sorry. There's government-free mulch from the city. And I thought these were questions, but people are just chatting about some different mulching options. So I think that's it.
All right, great. So thanks everyone for, I guess if there's any final questions, we could take it, but yeah, I guess that's it really. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us, and I hope that is helpful. The growing season is really upon us now, so we're looking forward to being super busy, and I hope you guys have a great growing season. And yeah, hopefully see folks in the next couple months. Yeah, and feel free to share your successes, failures, photos. We love to learn more about how people find their native plants are growing. So thank you, everyone.